Welcome to Ageless by Rescu. This podcast is devoted to exploring the science of rejuvenation, uncovering the most trusted experts, the must-have products, innovations, and technology in the field of vitality, aesthetics, new beauty, and cosmetic enhancement. I'm delighted to introduce Samantha Wills, I think Australia's business and beauty girl crush. Welcome to Ageless by Rescu podcast, my friend.
What an intro. Thank you. I haven't heard that one before.
Welcome home. Welcome to the podcast. And you are on, I know that you've launched your incredibly successful book. And now you're on the cusp of launching a new business, an academy. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the Samantha Wills Foundation, as it used to be called, was launched in 2016, kind of as a side, business, like not even a business, side interest, I think, to the Samantha Wills Jewellery brand. And I really wanted to share kind of, the human spirit of business and kind of not just the highlight reel and, the media grabs, but like the realities of it, and started sharing that back in 2016. And, fast forward to now, I closed the jewellery business in that time and have really turned my focus back to working with female founders and creative entrepreneurs. And we've just rebranded in the last week or so to the Samantha Wills Institute. So it's going to have a real education focus, a real handing over of tangible, documentation, P&L structure, pricing calculators, all the tangible things. If the book was the storytelling of that journey, this is the handing over of the tools that other entrepreneurs, I think will need for their journey.
I had the pleasure of working with you and had a really lovely experience, I want to say about 7 years ago in New York. We shot together, you were interviewed for Rescu, and we shot a beautiful campaign at the Plaza Hotel. And I remember meeting you in the lobby, and it was a hot New York day, and you were in this teensy-weensy little crocheted white dress, all, hair, your mane of hair, tan, legs. But the thing that just struck me is I'd seen you before and I'd interacted with you in a business sense, but never in a girl-to-girl sense. And you were really soft and shy. And I was really surprised because your energy was so soft and feminine. And I think I was expecting like Samantha Wills, the billboard.
Through the door.
the billboard.
It's really interesting. And I was speaking to someone about this the other day, and I said, I think in my career, I definitely am an extrovert, and I show up very, I'm not going to say loudly, but, with a presence, and have done that for most of my career. But I think, if I contrast that personally, there's a huge amount of introvert about me. I think I'm a creative introvert. Like I go away and creating my little creative cave and then kind of come out to the world and be like, here it is. But it's that real, I think the term is ambivert, where it really crosses over, but I'm really on the middle of the scale, but I can be incredibly introverted, and clearly I was that day.
Let me ask you, what does ageless mean to you? Because you've lived a lot of life. How old are you now as we're recording?
I'm 39.
You're 39 and you've achieved so much and had a lot of life. What does ageless mean, or rather feel to you?
Ageless to me, I feel like we get given this kind of framework growing up, especially as women, specifically as women, where it's like, hey, here's the framework that you're meant to follow. And it's like, you're meant to do this at this age, and then you're meant to, have a career, then get married and have babies by 30 at the latest, and, tick, 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 XYZ kind of thing. And I think that it's, to me, ageless is going like, I see your framework, but it's not my framework. I'm going to rework that framework for something that is right for me. And really not just, because I think we can say that in a very black and white sense, as in, well, that's the ideal, obviously, to create your own framework. But when you have to go through, in my case, 39 years of undoing of what society has told you to be, or taking on what your parents' framework is, or, whatever framework you've absorbed, you've actually got to undo that to rebuild it. And I think that's the hard bit. So to me, Ageless truly means accepting your own framework and your own timeline, and not doing the compare and despair around what someone else is doing, or what, this almost like globbed on societal framework that we've absorbed over time.
As someone who's achieved so much, and now you're going on to teach other women to kind of transform their lives and to tick some of the boxes that perhaps they've only dreamed of before, did you, as you were growing up or as a young woman, have a checklist of things you wanted to achieve by a certain age? Is that, why you moved to New York? Is that why you closed the jewelry business? Is that why you've taken on other projects? Has there been, as you were saying, that societal, blueprint that was impressed upon you that really drove you in those early phases?
It probably wasn't around, by a certain age for me. It was definitely, I think, in many ways, ego driven in one way, to be like, all right, well, I've started this jewelry, and I started the jewelry brand at 21. So everyone's like, oh, you were so brave. I was like, I was just naive. I had no idea what I was doing. And it was a complete leap of faith, which in a way was the huge benefit of it, right? But I think at that time, you kind of like, all right, well, the next step then is, and your framework of success is just different. Like, at 21, I was like, all right, well, my framework of success is if I have a celebrity wear the product, and you're like, all right, well, I got that, check that box. Then it kind of, your framework of that kind of grows. And then I think, I think the biggest thing from a societal thing for me was at 30 years old, I was like, oh my God, I should be married and have a baby right now. And I took that on from, in such a way that I didn't even realize I was putting that cloak of expectation on.
Wow.
Until it took me, I don't know, probably I found myself in a relationship for 3 years following that. And it wasn't until that relationship ended, I was like, hang on, I didn't even want to be married and have kids at 30, but I spent so long being like, oh my God, where's that person? How can I tick that box? And I'm like, wasn't even my box to tick. Like, and I think that's the thing where we're like, we chase these things and it's exhausting, and we wonder why it doesn't feel good. And we're like, well, it's not yours to chase. And I'm not saying not ever, but at that time, that's not your box to tick. So that was probably the main one for me, was hitting 30 and being like, oh shit, I should have been married and have a kid by now.
You were living in New York, which is, of course, like a completely different energy to living in Sydney. What was your take on on your arrival into that scene? Because you really did thrive in that environment in a lot of ways, and your business grew. And for me, as an outsider watching you, I felt that your voice and your ability to share of yourself like massively amplified. You went from being a jewelry designer to being an icon, to being a personality, to being, someone that people were interested in your hair, in your teeth, in your legs. What happened?
It's so weird when you say it like that, but yeah, I think, I moved to New York in 2010, and it was off the back of, we had a placement in Sex and the City, one of the films. And so I moved over there because we're getting so much interest from the States. And I was 28 years old at the time. And, I shared this in the book where I'm like, I kind of went over there bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but it was hard. Like, I describe New York as a cruel mistress. Like, it's someone you just keep going back to, but they just treat you so badly. And it's very much, the first probably 2 years there were really tough, and just trying to find your feet and trying to, the energy over there is a lot different. It's very much a can-do attitude, where it's not like, oh, if you have a bigger pie, then my pie is smaller. It's more like, hey, if we work together, we're both going to have a massive bit of pie, so let's like take this on. And there's definitely not that tall poppy syndrome mentality that I feel like is more common in Australia. And I think it was probably around, if I pinpoint when you say that about separating from being a jewelry designer, it wasn't a conscious choice by any means, but I think that it was probably around 2015 that my career really started to diverge. Obviously still designing jewellery, and by that point I probably had designed about 10,000 pieces of jewellery.
Wow,
so that was still definitely like my job in the technical sense. But I think, over those years I had shared a lot on social media, and I think around that time, and that was when the relationship I was speaking about before ended, and I just kind of shed the old me, in a way is probably the best way to describe it, and shed what I no longer needed. And that relationship ending forced me to do that. It was very painful and personally dark time. And then when I was able to re-emerge, I kind of, did so with more resilience and more vulnerability and more confidence and grounding, I think, in my own self, which then, I talk about when we operate from our true authentic self, that's when we manifest what's right for us. And I think the word manifest has, been so bastardized in this day and age, and people think, oh, it's mood boards with this, gorgeous house in the Maldives, holiday pictures on it. I'm like, no, that's such elementary manifestation. Manifestation is when you truly operate from here, from this, solar plexus heart space. That is when you attract what is meant for you. And if you're operating in any other sense outside of that, you'll just attract things that are not meant for you. So it either won't be sustainable, or it will just fall over on its face immediately. And that relates to business, life, whatever. And so I think at that time for me, that's when I really was like, got in here and started attracting the career that was right for me. And that involved things outside of just jewellery design. So it was, it wasn't planned, but when it clicked, I felt it.
I think something that you spoke about, and you've spoken about very openly, is that heartbreak is ageless, and it's kind of borderless, and it hurts just as much with your first love at 16 as it does, if you're 17, your spouse dies, or in your case, the experience that you had. Heartbreak is often a massive trigger for change, and exactly what you said. So you talked about it being, you moved into a different space, but again, from the outside world, you also seem to have transformed physically, and there was a shift in how you looked. And I remember in your book, you talked about the time where you were the ambassador for Yellow Glen, and your billboards were all over Australia, and you looked amazing. But it was also like the darkest time in your life. Tell me about that, kind of the transcendence from being, a young innocent to reinventing Samantha Wills from an external kind of, as a newborn woman.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I honestly don't think at that time it was a strategic, like when you say it like that, it's like, oh, that would have been a really strategic brand move to kind of rebrand and change the look and things. But I think the truth is, like, it was an aging thing. It was, when kind of, the industry first saw me, I was 21, and, you kind of go through those years. And I think around that time, I was 33, 34, 35 at that time. And it just was an evolution. And I think, as I said before, like a forced one, because you're forced to, everything that no longer kind of serves you was stripped away from me. So you're kind of like standing there bare. At the time, it's incredibly raw and painful. But when I look at it now, I'm like, okay, you have the choice then to onboard what you want. You have the choice to, rebuild in a way that, and I think that's what I did then. And I think it was just a maturing of myself. And I think, and I'm not in any way comparing myself to the woman I'm about to say, but if you look at Taylor Swift's career, the evolution, that she was 16 when she started, and, you can see that evolution. And I think it's just a natural progression that you have to keep evolving and reinventing yourself in different ways. So I think that was the time for me.
And what do you do to keep fit and to keep sane? Do you have any rituals that you follow that you just never miss?
I wish I could say that I did, but no, I'm like, if I'm working on a really big project, getting this this masterclass launch right now, and I'm doing, you know, back to doing 15-hour days and not leaving my office, which I know is not good. But I think what I've learned now is there are times, I think previously, you know, people are like, oh, you know, in entrepreneurialism, especially like, oh, you work too much, or, you know, you need to find some balance. And I'm like, well, what is balance to a creative entrepreneur? And, you know, I mentioned that in the book. I'm like, that term was definitely not coined by a creative entrepreneur, because when you're working on something creatively, that is what gives you energy in a way. And I liken it, if, you know, someone was an Olympic swimmer and they're up at 3 o'clock every morning, you know, training and in the pool 5 times a day, people aren't going to be like, oh, you know, you're training too much, you're chasing your dream too hard. They'll be like, oh my God, you're so dedicated. But when it comes to entrepreneurship, I think that the traditional framework, going back to that, is that it's a job and it should be a 9 to 5 in some weird universe, because that's not, you know, ever possible. So I think for me, when I'm on a project, I'm in, and I'm the first to say that my health probably takes a second seat to that. But then when that project is done, I'm like, all right, now I'm going to go back and reinvest in myself. In New York, that meant a lot of soul cycle classes, like spin classes. There's a one here, we're in lockdown at the moment, but when that's opened, shelter spin class. I live in Bondi, so down at the beach a lot down there, but it's not a balanced, you know, ritual by any means. It's an all-in work, and then it's an all-in, you know, wellness, which yeah, it's still something I'm trying to work out.
Do you have a skincare routine?
I do. I actually use Rodan and Fields, which I absolutely love. I've been using it for about 2 years now, and I just, yeah, that's the only thing I use. It's so brilliant.
A lot of people love that. I use their cleanser and I think it's fantastic.
The blue one?
Yes, the blue foaming one. Do you have facials? Do you have laser? Do you have Botox? What do you do to you know, to keep your skin looking great? Because it is one of your signatures, your glowing skin and your beautiful, thick, healthy hair is kind of 2 of your signatures.
And yours. I love facials by Fen, which is a new, it's from the founder of Onda in Paddington. Nicole is her name, but she's, out of any facial I've ever had in the entire world, she is brilliant. So I highly
What's
recommend
different
that.
about her facial technique that you love?
It's very much, I say it's like going to church. Like, you're in there and it's, the way that she touches your body is in the same beat as your heart. So your entire body, you just can't help but immerse in. It's truly a spiritual experience. And by the way, she's incredible at skin. So it's twofold for me. So I actually go there, even if I don't need a facial, I go there just as like almost like therapy. But yeah, she's a magician and a skin wizard. But yeah, no, I think what lockdown has taught me is, you know, I'm probably not a beautician or a hair colorist at home, but my God, I have tried. So,
God,
you know,
haven't we all? This is my nightmare hair, but you know, here we are.
It looks gorgeous.
And tell me about your views on aging gracefully or disgracefully. What are your thoughts on having intervention, like biohacking supplements? Would you ever consider surgery or lasers or injectables?
Yeah, absolutely. I have absolutely no problem with that. I think it's when everyone starts to look the same is the problem that I have. And, you know, I shouldn't say problem. It's more like, I'm just like, the individuality is the key, and the importance is the thing that I stand behind entirely, be it in business and branding or in life. And I think maintaining that is so important. And, you know, I look around now on Instagram and I'm like, there's people that I couldn't even tell you if that's that person or that person, because they look so similar. And I think that's when it's not interesting to me anymore. But I think, you know, whatever is good for the individual and makes them feel their best self. I just think we need to be questioning the framework around why we're doing certain things and making sure the framework of that is of our best interest to our soul and spirit.
I think creativity is a really interesting platform for the ageless conversation. And, you know, before we recorded, we were talking about like heartbreak, like falling in love, like certain other things. Creativity seems to have no boundary when it comes to age or stage in your life. Tell me what your experience of that has been. You know, were you more creative when you were younger? Do you meet artists or creative souls or entrepreneurs who get better with age. How does agelessness fit into the framework of that world?
I think it's your worldview at any given time. So if I'm going to sit down and design jewelry today, it's going to come from a worldview that is very and experience and travel and every human emotion under the sun than it was 10 years ago, for example. So I mean, creativity is such in the eye of the beholder, right? To be like, oh, you're a better creative then than you were, when you're older than when you were younger. It's all about, I guess, the audience or, what your measure of success of creativity is. For me, my creative output's different now. Like I use a different part of my mind to create at this time in my life. And, I say when I closed the jewelry business, I was designing jewelry with my hands, but not my heart at that point. Like my heart had left that connection. And as a creative person, yeah, right. And it's really scary feeling as a creative, because that is your lifeblood, and it's what makes your blood pump through your veins. So when that stopped, when that heartbeat stopped, I had to go find what that next one was. And for me, now that is teaching and storytelling and writing. But there was a time there where I didn't know what that was going to be. So I think I think creativity as a journey, it's without a doubt ageless. It's more, I'm going to say project-based, but it's, there's different chapters of it. And I think being aware of what lights your heart on fire is really important to follow that, because I think, again, our framework is like, well, if something's good, we've got to stay in it. And even if your heart's not in it, that's creative suicide, to stay in something that your heart is no longer in. So knowing when to close the door on a chapter in any element and moving forward to see what that next one is, and taking that leap of faith when sometimes you might not know what the future holds, but that in that moment it's time to take that step forward.
One of the things that I've read a lot about, of course, with Ageless, I'm always looking at all the different aspects of it. And one of the key areas of science is neuroplasticity. And there is so much research around the link between art and creativity and brain regeneration and sharpness. What would you recommend to someone who feels like they don't have a creative bone in their body? What could be something small that they could do that would switch on that part of their brain and help, create a more playful, youthful, rewired, creative part of their mind?
A great question. I think that, so often we think that creative is paint sets and a pottery wheel, and it's very much the traditional arts, which of course it is, but I'm like, we create things as humans. We're born to create. We create friendships, we create careers, we create community. So I think firstly breaking that thought process that if I'm not good at traditional art, I'm not creative. I think the second one is following your curiosity, like just what piques your interest. Like, oh, I've always wanted to try that. And now everything's at our fingertips, right? Like you can go on Udemy, or you can go on masterclass.com, or you can literally do a workshop in an afternoon and be like, okay, I tried crochet or whatever it is. So I think the accessibility is there. And the final one for me, and this is what I teach in one of my creative space workshops, is 900 seconds is all you need to just show up for 900 seconds, which is 15 minutes. So it's nothing. Because I think so often we get caught in this procrastination and, this conversation with imposter syndrome. It's like, you're not really good at painting, so why would you try that kind of thing? And all imposter syndrome is a holding pattern of procrastination. So you're like, all right, I hear you, imposter syndrome. I'm just going to go over here for 900 seconds and just try it. And if I don't like it, I'll come back and, carry on with this conversation. And usually what you find is when you just start, you don't have to be good at it. You can literally put your hand up at the sun and be like, I'm going to be really terrible at this, and remove all expectation from yourself. And just start. And then, you usually find 900 seconds in, you're like, I'm enjoying this, I'm going to stay a little longer. If you don't, walk away from it. So I think removing the big, oh my gosh, I need to do something creative in my life. And it's like, just cut it down to bite size, and it's much easier to start that way.
I love that. 900 seconds. That is so good. Speaking of imposter syndrome, a lot of people look at, women in media, or women who've achieved so much, or people that we put on pedestals for their beauty or their success or their relationships. And we project onto them, all of our own fantasies and wishes. Have you ever had imposter syndrome for that projection that the media and your fans and your followers projected onto you?
Absolutely. I have imposter syndrome, as you know, I gave it a character in my book because it's so prominent in my life. And I think I don't know where it derives from, but everyone, if you think anyone doesn't have imposter syndrome, then it's just not the truth. Like absolutely everyone does. And I think in this day and age of Instagram, you know, I can find myself scrolling on Instagram and part of my mind's like, get off Instagram, like this is bad for your mental health. And I'm like, just one more scroll, just one more scroll. And then, you know, like 30 minutes later, I'm like waiting for an adult to tell me to get off my screen time. And I'm like, no, Samantha, you are the adult here. So make that decision. But yeah, like you're on there and it's, even if you're not consciously doing it, it is the home of compare and despair. And I think it's constant. I think we're always subconsciously kind of projecting on it. That's why the never ending scroll, you know, we lose an hour on Instagram and we don't even know what we're looking at kind of thing. So it's something I think we have to be really, really proactively conscious of. Yeah.
You know, when we were younger, there wasn't obviously social media. When was there a time in your life where you kind of consciously thought, I'm an attractive woman, like I like who I am and I identify as being beautiful?
I don't remember a time. I think there's moments where I have looked after myself. Like I feel my best when I'm, you know, exercising, obviously, and when I, you know, blow dry my hair and when I put that effort in. And I think, especially through lockdown, where some days I'm like, I'm just going to put fake tan on because I really need to just sit and, you know, take care of myself to feel better about myself in a, you know, I'm not going anywhere. No one's going to see it, but it's a self thing. So it hasn't been a time where I'm like, okay, you know, that's the new me. I think I look, you know, X, Y, and Z. But there's times where I'm like, okay, I feel good now. And when I feel good, I feel beautiful. If that answers the question.
I remember there was a few months ago when you had your surgery, you were sharing some images of your body as you'd gone through. I think you were taking cortisol or whatever you were taking and all the steroids, and you were really open about it. And I thought that was really interesting because before, again, as I was saying, you were one of the women that, you know, Australian girls and Australian women looked to and said, oh, I want to look like her. And then you shared the unfiltered images of this is what's happening to my body as I go through this surgery. How did you feel about that? And do you think that like a younger Samantha Wills would have had the mental dexterity and the confidence to be so unfiltered? Do you think that that's that ability to kind of say, you know, this is me, frizzy hair, pimple on my chin, recovering from surgery, that comes with, you know, maturity and experience and confidence?
Yeah, absolutely. And to answer the first part of your question, I don't think younger me would have had that confidence to do it. I think what I had gone through with the endometriosis and with the surgery and with closing the business, and I think the underlying thing to me was how I had spoken to my body over that time, and with when the endo wasn't diagnosed. And you know, the words I would use in my head was like, oh, you know, this is so annoying, you're such a hindrance, like it was so vile that, you know, I really sat with it and be like, man, if my best friend every single month was in, you know, screaming pain, crying out for someone to help her, and I turned around and said, God, you're annoying, like you're such a hindrance. Like I would never, ever think of saying that to my best friend, but that's how I was talking to my body when it was asking me for help. Wow. So I think it was
such
really
a big revelation.
Yeah, it was. And it was really sobering and humbling to be like, hang on, if I do this, I'm sure there's other women that speak to themselves like this. And I don't even think it's a conscious choice. Again, I think it's just an internal narrative that we do. And it's so dangerous. So I think, I don't know, it wasn't even a second thought to me to share not only the pictures, but the story behind that, that journey and the outpouring. My God, my inbox, like without exaggeration, I would have got almost 2,000 messages from women. I think, you know, endo as a disease in itself is not at all talked about as much as it should be. It's quite common. It's 1 in 9 women. And because it's, you know, it affects you know, your monthly cycle, women have been brought up again with framework to be like, oh, we don't talk about that publicly. Or, you know, you think back to ads you know, when we're growing up, you know, the carefree ads, you're like, all right, well, that girl's wearing white capris on a bicycle. Like, all right, well, I guess that's what it's meant to look like. Kind of like there was just no framework around, hey, it can be this, or this, not just like it's meant to be this. So, you know, adding normality and normalizing that conversation was important. And that was about the photo, that was about the story, and that was about, hey, we need to normalize this conversation.
If you could go back to 25-year-old version of you, what would you share with her as her wiser, older self?
Oh, so much. I think, you know, don't worry so much what anyone else thinks, because no one really cares. I think, you know, yes, we look at other people and we're interested in their lives and things like that. But at the end of the day, human beings are quite selfish and inward facing. So we're all worried about our own insecurities, where we think everyone's going to be, oh, you know, I remember going to a party when I was in high school, and I said to my mom, I can't go wearing these shoes. Everyone will look at them. And she's like, get over yourself. Like, no one gives a shit about your shoes. Like, so I think, you know, I think at 25, I was very, not concerned, but almost sometimes crippled by what, you know, what I was perceived as, or what the brand was perceived as. So I would tell myself to just don't worry so much about that. And I think, you know, throughout the entire journey, the other piece of information was be like, you are intuitive. Just because you can't tangibly, you know, hold on to a yes or no decision, but you know it inside, trust that. Because I think, you know, we know what intuition means. We've known it from since we were children, but it's been squashed where, you know, that is not celebrated. That sense is not celebrated. So I think, you know, I really encouraging myself to trust that intuition.
And if you were to time travel to your 50s, what would that wiser, more experienced version of Samantha say to you today?
Oh, she'd probably tell me like not to be working 15-hour days without setting foot outside the house, and get a bit more wellness back in there. I don't know. I've never gone that way, actually. Yeah, I think she'd be like, hey, you've just been through a really big health journey. How about you listen to your body when it is talking to you? Because yeah, it's like I know, but I'm still my own worst enemy in those senses. So I think it would be a health related conversation from 50-year-old Samantha.
Well, health is wealth, and that's what keeps you ageless. And that's why I wanted to make sure that this podcast was beyond, you know, beauty products and, you know, all the surface things, because every single beautiful man or woman that I've ever interviewed, it's always an inside job, not just their psychology, but also their health and the way that they're taking care of themselves. And, you know, we both know, I remember running into you at the mall one time. It was right after the breakup. And, you know, there's nothing as aging as sadness or trauma.
And it is like it sits on your shoulders and it pulls at you, and it's an energy. And you know, if anyone thinks it's just a feeling and that's it, I'm like, no, it is. If you could see it, it's a big dark energy, and it sits in you until you can shed it in a way. And yeah, that was a rough time, and I wanted to share that story in depth in the book, because it's, you know, even though it's a personal story, as a business owner, I mean, you know, like if you're going through heartbreak or grief or trauma or, you know, or a health issue, like you still have to show up and be. So I think, you know, we're sharing that polar element and the parallel of that is so important.
And to wrap it up, I would love you to share with us, what are some quick hacks that take you from blah to feeling or presenting fresh and your most vital, youthful self?
Oh, I think at a very surface level, getting in and washing your hair, like with not just like a normal shampoo and conditioner, but you know, those scalp scrubs, like really, like it's a really visceral kind of, you know, shedding, almost like a baptism, and you know, blow drying your hair for me is a really grounding and centering one. And I think movement in and of itself, like even if it's not for a physical, you know, wellness priority, moving the body moves energy. And I think, you know, if I'm working on something and I need a creative solution, I will get up and walk around and move to try and shift that energy to allow what is trying to find me to a place to land. So that would be my two very simple hacks.
And do you have a beauty look that makes you feel instantly fresh and it's like an easy go-to that always works?
I do love just like a bronzy makeup. So yeah, I'm not great at doing my makeup, but definitely just like a bronzy cheek and a highlighter and a mascara and a brow gel. And that would be my basics.
Fantastic. And finally, do you have an ageless muse that you follow, you look up to, you're inspired by?
I love Helen Mirren. I think I look at her and I'm just like, you are powerful. Like, she's incredible. Michelle Obama, I think is incredible. But yeah, I'd say Helen Mirren is probably my number one.
And what about younger girls? You mentioned Taylor Swift. Do you look at younger girls too? Because I always do. I love young people, and I think, oh, I learned something from you.
I love you. I mean, I am such an admirer of Taylor Swift. I admire what she's done with her career. I admire how she treats her fans. I admire her business savvy. And I think she's a really interesting one. As we said before, you know, she's been in the spotlight. So to see her progression, she would be my number one who I would have dinner with. Although I'm such a fan, I'd probably mess it up. So they say never meet your idols. So that could be one that just wish and hope.
It was so good to talk to you. I always love speaking with you, and I always feel energized. And your book was so generous. Your social media is so generous. I'm excited that you have got the Institute launching as well, so that, you know, we can tap into more of our own creativity and learn about that, because it really is such a pathway to being ageless, such a pathway to reinventing yourself and reinvigorating your soul. So it was a beautiful conversation for me to share with our audience, and I really want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for providing this platform, and your questions are so brilliant and so needed. So thank you for stepping up and allowing conversations like this to happen. And I think at the end of the day, ageless really is when you feel your truest self. So, you know, whatever we can do to shed and to peel back and to unlearn and get back to what we really want to do, to me, I think is the ultimate ageless.
I do too. Wonderful to see you. Enjoy the rest of lockdown with the rest of us, but you look fantastic. This is my own version of a blow dry. It's awful.
I love it. All right, my love, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. And yeah, please shout out with anything that you need.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please share and rate this episode. I'd love that.